I don't want to hear another word from your mouth, Mr. Cole. The evidence is absolute. Judge Evelyn Carter's voice was a steel whip echoing through the hushed courtroom, her mahogany gavel slamming down with bone-rattling finality. You are a predator. A ghost who thought he could outsmart the law. Bail is denied. Darius Cole stood in heavy iron chains, his head bowed, the perfect picture of a broken, defeated man, but beneath his lowered gaze, a cold, calculating smile tugged at the corner of his lips. She thought she was burying a nobody. She had just triggered a trap. The chambers of the Honorable Judge Evelyn Carter smelled of old money, expensive leather, and unbridled arrogance. Rain lashed against the heavy, bulletproof glass of her 12th-floor office in the heart of downtown Chicago, the sprawling, glittering metropolis looking like a jagged chessboard she controlled. Evelyn stood by the window, swirling a crystal tumbler of Macallan 25, her reflection superimposed over the city skyline. At 52, she was the picture of judicial elegance, silver hair cut into a sharp, intimidating bob, tailored designer suits beneath her black robes, and eyes as cold and calculating as a diamond cutter. But beneath the veneer of untouchable justice lay a labyrinth of staggering corruption. Evelyn was the apex predator of Cook County's judicial system. For the past decade, she had been the silent architect of a massive money-laundering syndicate, moving illicit funds for the city's most dangerous cartels and corrupt politicians. But recently, a local investigative journalist had gotten too close to the truth regarding a missing $40 million city infrastructure fund. The journalist had been permanently silenced, but a scapegoat was desperately needed to take the fall for both the embezzlement and the subsequent murder. The syndicate demanded a clean resolution, and Evelyn, their most valuable asset, was tasked with providing the sacrificial lamb. She turned to the man sitting in the shadows of her office, a high-priced fixer named Silas. "Do we have the mark?" she asked, her voice smooth, betraying none of the lethal intent behind her words. Silas tossed a thick manila folder onto her pristine oak desk. "Darius Cole," he replied, his voice a low gravel. 34 years old. Runs a failing auto restoration shop on the south side. Ex-military, dishonorable discharge on his record for insubordination, no family to speak of, no political ties, no money. He's a ghost in the system, Evelyn. The perfect patsy. Evelyn walked over, her manicured fingers grazing the edge of the file before she opened it. A photograph of Darius Cole stared back at her. He was a physically imposing black man with hardened features, deep-set, soulful eyes, and grease-stained hands. He looked exactly like the kind of man the system chewed up and spat out every single day. The evidence? Evelyn pressed, taking a sip of her scotch. Flawless, Silas smirked. We utilized a black market license of the NSO Group's Pegasus spyware military-grade Israeli tech. It requires zero-click infiltration. We beamed it directly to his smartphone. The malware bypassed his encryption and implanted the falsified financial ledgers, the offshore routing numbers, and the GPS coordinates linking him to the journalist's murder scene. The police will find the exact burner phone used to order the hit stashed in the air vents of his garage. It's an ironclad frame job. Evelyn smiled, a slow, predatory curving of her lips. The beauty of her position was that she didn't just plant the evidence, she controlled the arena where that evidence would be judged. She would ensure the case landed on her docket. She would deny bail. She would overrule every defense objection. She would bury Darius Cole so deep beneath a mountain of fabricated digital forensics and legal precedent that he would never see the sun again. Execute the raid, Evelyn commanded, closing the file with a soft, final thud. I want him in chains by midnight. And Silas? Make sure the arresting officers rough him up just enough to make him look desperate for the mugshot. Juries love a desperate man. As Silas left the room, Evelyn walked back to the window, watching the lightning streak across the bruised sky. She felt a surge of intoxicating power. She was the law. She dictated truth and falsehood, freedom and captivity. She had ruined dozens of lives to build her secret empire, and Darius Cole was simply another stepping stone on her path to absolute invulnerability. She didn't view him as a human being, he was merely a variable in a mathematical equation of power. She drained her glass, the expensive liquor burning pleasantly down her throat. Tomorrow, she would put on her black robe, ascend the bench, and look down upon her latest victim with the stern, righteous fury of a fair judge. The trap was set, the narrative written. There was absolutely no way this greasy mechanic could ever fight back against the combined weight of the police, the prosecution, and the judge herself. Evelyn Carter went to sleep that night with the peaceful conscience of a monster who had thoroughly convinced herself she was a god. The rhythmic, metallic clanking of a socket wrench echoed through the cavernous, dimly lit expanse of Cole's Customs. Darius Cole lay beneath the rusted chassis of a 1969 Mustang Mach 1, grease smudged across his forehead, his powerful muscles straining as he tightened a bolt on the transmission. Classic soul music hummed from a beat-up radio in the corner, blending with the smell of motor oil, old leather, and ozone. To anyone walking down the gritty South Side street, Darius was exactly what he appeared to be, a solitary, hard-working mechanic trying to keep his head above water. He slid out from under the car, wiping his hands on a rag, his dark eyes scanning the quiet garage. The silence felt heavy. Too heavy. Darius wasn't just a mechanic. The grease under his fingernails and the faded military tattoos on his arms were carefully curated props. Darius Cole was an elite, deep-cover operative for the FBI's National Security Branch, specifically attached to a highly classified anti-corruption task force operating out of the J. Edgar Hoover building in Washington. For 18 months, he had been meticulously building this identity, embedding himself in Chicago's underworld to map the sprawling money-laundering network bleeding the city dry. He had tracked the money through shell companies, phantom real estate deals, and cryptocurrency tumblers like Tornado Cash, slowly working his way up the ladder. He knew the syndicate structure, but he was missing the keystone, the high-level protector keeping the entire operation insulated from the law. Suddenly, the ambient street noise outside vanished. The subtle crunch of heavy boots on gravel drifted through the thin aluminum walls of the garage. Darius's posture instantly shifted. The tired, slouched mechanic vanished, replaced by the hyper-aware, lethal stillness of a trained predator. He didn't run. He didn't reach for the modified Glock 19 hidden beneath the cash register. Instead, he took a deep, calculated breath, slowing his heart rate, preparing to play the role of his life. Crash. The front door of the garage exploded inward in a shower of splintered wood and shattered glass. Tactical flashlights pierced the gloom like blinding laser beams. A dozen heavily armed SWAT officers swarmed into the room, assault rifles raised, laser sights painting erratic red dots across Darius's chest. Chicago PD. Get on the ground. Show me your hands. The lead officer roared, his voice amplified by the enclosed space. Darius immediately raised his hands, widening his eyes to simulate pure, unadulterated panic. Whoa, hey, easy. I'm unarmed, what's going on? He shouted, his voice cracking with feigned terror. He dropped to his knees, lacing his fingers behind his head. 3 officers tackled him to the concrete, driving a knee violently into his spine. The cold steel of handcuffs bit ruthlessly into his wrists, ratcheted tight enough to cut off circulation. Darius gasped, allowing his face to contort in pain, selling the illusion of a helpless civilian overwhelmed by state violence. Darius Cole, you are under arrest for first-degree murder, wire fraud, and grand larceny, a detective in a cheap suit said, stepping into the light, holding up a transparent evidence bag containing a burner phone, a phone Darius had never seen before in his life. Found this little beauty tucked in the ventilation shaft. Along with a digital trail that's going to put you on death row, pal. As they hauled him to his feet and dragged him toward the waiting armored vehicle, Darius's mind raced with chilling clarity. First-degree murder. Wire fraud. The missing 40 million. The dead journalist. In an instant, the puzzle pieces locked together in his mind. The syndicate hadn't discovered he was an undercover agent. If they had, they would have simply put a bullet in his head in a dark alley. No, they thought he was exactly what his cover profile dictated, a disposable nobody. They were framing him. But orchestrating a frame job of this magnitude, coordinating SWAT, planting a burner phone, and faking a digital footprint that required immense, coordinated power. It required someone who could manipulate warrants and steer the judicial process. It required a judge. As they shoved him into the back of the sweltering transport van, the heavy metal doors slamming shut and plunging him into darkness, Darius allowed the terrified mask to slip just a fraction. In the pitch black, a grim, dangerous smile spread across his face. They had come looking for a scapegoat. Instead, they had just handed the FBI's most lethal undercover operative the exact golden key needed to dismantle their entire empire from the inside. The hunter had just been invited into the lion's den, and the lions had no idea they were the prey. Cook County Jail was a concrete purgatory, a chaotic ecosystem of violence, despair, and deafening noise. The air smelled of bleach, stale sweat, and fear. Darius was stripped of his clothes, processed, and thrown into an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely over his muscular frame. He was placed in a high-security holding block, a testament to the severity of the fabricated charges levied against him. For the first 48 hours, Darius played the part of the terrified innocent to perfection. He sat huddled on his thin, rigid cot, his eyes darting nervously at the hardened gang members pacing the cell block. He stuttered when spoken to by the guards. He refused his meals, letting the gray slop congeal on the plastic tray. The prison surveillance cameras recorded a broken man, rapidly unraveling under the weight of his impending doom. But beneath the surface, Darius was working. Every terrified glance was a tactical assessment of guard patrols, camera blind spots, and the complex social hierarchy of the block. He was mapping the environment. On the third day, during a brief, highly supervised recreation period in the concrete yard, Darius managed to brush past an inmate known for smuggling contraband. A microscopic sleight of hand, honed through years of clandestine training, transferred a tiny, flat, non-metallic communication chip from the smuggler's pocket to Darius's palm. It cost him a promise of commissary funds he would never have to pay. That night, under the cover of a staged coughing fit and the darkness of lights out, Darius pried open the casing of the standard-issue digital clock bolted to the wall of his cell. With surgical precision, using a shaved piece of plastic from a toothbrush, he spliced the contraband chip into the clock's power supply and antenna array. He wasn't building a phone, he was building a burst transmitter. He tapped a rapid, rhythmic sequence on the clock's plastic surface, Morse code, heavily encrypted, transmitting on a secure frequency that would bounce off a local cell tower and ping directly to a classified server in Quantico, Virginia. Op cleared, cover intact, framed for steel murder. Syndicate lead is presiding judge. Need bait tactics. Stand by. Within 5 minutes, the digital display on the clock flickered, the numbers slightly altering to deliver a coded response from Director Vance, his handler at the FBI. Received. Carter confirmed, play the victim. Let her hang herself. Cavalry is ready. Meanwhile, 5 miles away, Judge Evelyn Carter was dining in the private, velvet-draped VIP room of a Michelin-starred restaurant. She sat across from Silas and a prominent, corrupt state senator. The table was laden with imported Wagyu beef and a bottle of Domaine de la Romane Conti. The initial hearings went flawlessly, Evelyn purred, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin. The defense attorney assigned to him is a terrified public defender fresh out of law school. The Pegasus data has been entered into evidence without a single technical objection. The digital forensics experts we paid off have authenticated the offshore transfers through Tornado Cash. Cole is paralyzed. He barely spoke a word during the arraignment. Is there any risk of him taking a plea deal to a lesser charge? The senator asked, sweating slightly in his expensive suit. If he talks. He has nothing to talk about, Evelyn laughed softly, a sound devoid of warmth. He doesn't know who framed him, and I have denied him the possibility of a plea. We are going to trial. I want a highly publicized, brutal conviction. I want the media to see Darius Cole as the mastermind behind the missing $40 million. Once the jury hands down a guilty verdict, the FBI will close their broader investigation into the city's finances. We will be untouchable. Evelyn raised her crystal wine glass, the ruby liquid catching the dim, ambient light of the chandelier. To the perfect crime, she toasted. To the perfect crime, the men echoed, clinking their glasses against hers. Evelyn felt a deep, warm glow of absolute superiority. She had manipulated the complex machinery of the American justice system to serve her own greed, twisting the law into a weapon of self-preservation. She believed she had anticipated every variable, every possible counter-move. But as she savored the expensive wine, she remained blissfully ignorant of the invisible, high-tech web that the FBI was silently weaving around her, anchored by the very man she had locked in a cage. The hubris of Evelyn Carter was a fatal disease, and the symptoms were about to become terminal. The pre-trial hearings were a masterclass in psychological warfare, a delicate dance of deception played out in the stark, fluorescent-lit arena of Courtroom 3B. Darius sat at the defense table, his shoulders slumped, his eyes fixed firmly on his handcuffed wrists. Beside him sat his court-appointed public defender, a nervous, sweaty young man named Arthur Penhaligon. Or at least, that's who Arthur appeared to be. In reality, Special Agent Arthur Penhaligon was one of the FBI's top undercover legal attachés, a brilliant legal mind acting as Darius's silent conduit to the Bureau. Their interactions were a meticulously choreographed performance for the benefit of Judge Carter and the prosecution. Evelyn presided over the court from her elevated bench like an imperious queen. She looked down at Darius with a mixture of contempt and bored amusement. She was entirely in her element, manipulating the procedural flow of the court with effortless cruelty. "Your Honor," Arthur stammered, shuffling a stack of papers with trembling hands. "The defense files a motion in limine to suppress the digital evidence recovered from my client's mobile device. We argue that the search warrant executed by the Cyber Division lacked probable cause and that the digital footprint showing the Tornado cash transfers was improperly acquired." Evelyn sighed dramatically, leaning back in her leather chair. "Mr. Penhaligon, this is your third motion to suppress this week, and it is as legally baseless as the previous two. The prosecution has provided sworn affidavits from the cyber forensics team detailing the lawful extraction of the data. But Your Honor, the defense asserts that the device may have been compromised remotely," Arthur pushed, playing the part of the desperate but outmatched rookie. "There are indicators of an NSO Group Pegasus payload." "Overruled," Evelyn snapped, bringing her gavel down with a sharp crack. Her eyes narrowed. The mention of Pegasus was a slight irritant, a mosquito buzzing near her ear, but she quickly swatted it away. "I have reviewed the state's methodology. The evidence is pristine. I will not have this court bogged down by wild, sci-fi conspiracy theories because your client lacks a credible alibi. The digital ledgers are admissible." Darius visibly flinched at the sound of the gavel, burying his face in his hands. But behind his fingers, his eyes were sharp, tracking Evelyn's every micro-expression. He was baiting her. By presenting weak, easily dismissible legal arguments, Arthur was deliberately inflating Evelyn's ego, encouraging her to abandon caution and trample over standard judicial procedure to ensure the conviction. Over the next 2 weeks, the trap deepened. To ensure Darius had absolutely no avenue of appeal, Evelyn began personally altering the court transcripts. She met privately with the lead prosecutor, off the record, to coach him on how to circumvent potential evidentiary hurdles. She used her secure judicial terminal to access and delete sealed complaints against the corrupt police officers who had executed the raid. Every single one of these actions was an illegal abuse of power. And every single one was being silently logged, tracked, and recorded by the FBI's Cyber Division. Director Vance, sitting in a darkened command center in Quantico, watched the live data streams rolling across his monitors. By connecting her personal digital fingerprint to the suppression of evidence, Evelyn was cementing her role in the conspiracy. "She's getting sloppy," Vance muttered to a technician beside him. "She's so focused on burying coal that she's leaving a massive, glowing trail of breadcrumbs right to her own doorstep." Back in the holding cell, Darius received his nightly coded burst transmission through the wall clock. "Be it taken. She is manipulating the record. We have her corruption on tape. Prepare for trial." The trap snaps shut on the stand. Darius laid back on his uncomfortable cot, staring up at the cracked concrete ceiling. He had spent his entire career hunting monsters in the shadows, terrorists, cartels, human traffickers, but there was something uniquely vile about Evelyn Carter. She wrapped herself in the sacred flag of justice while acting as an executioner for the corrupt. She used the law not as a shield for the innocent, but as a sword to protect the guilty. Tomorrow, the main trial would begin. Tomorrow, Darius would finally take off the mask of the terrified victim. He closed his eyes, his breathing slow and measured, listening to the chaotic sounds of the prison around him. He wasn't a prisoner anymore. He was a loaded gun, pointed directly at the heart of the judge's empire, and her finger was resting blissfully on the trigger. The atmosphere in Courtroom 3B was electric, stiflingly hot, and packed to absolute capacity. The high-profile nature of the stolen $40 million and the murdered journalist had drawn a swarm of reporters, their cameras flashing like strobe lights in the hallway outside. Inside, the heavy oak doors were sealed shut. The air conditioning struggled against the body heat of the gallery. Judge Evelyn Carter took the bench, her black robe billowing slightly, her posture radiating absolute authority. She surveyed the room, her gaze lingering momentarily on the press box, ensuring they were capturing her commanding presence. Then, she looked down at the defense table. Darius Cole sat motionless. He looked exhausted, his broad shoulders slumped beneath an ill-fitting suit provided by the county. He looked exactly like a lamb led to the slaughter. The prosecution spent the first 3 days of the trial building an insurmountable wall of fabricated evidence. They paraded a series of expert witnesses who testified to the complex web of cryptocurrency transfers. They showed the jury giant, glossy blow-ups of Darius's bank accounts created by the syndicate suddenly flush with millions of dollars routed through offshore havens linked to Credit Suisse. They presented the burner phone found in his garage, playing a deeply manipulated audio recording of a voice that sounded vaguely like Darius ordering the hit on the journalist. Through it all, Arthur Penhaligon bumbled his cross-examinations. He asked leading questions that allowed the prosecution's witnesses to further incriminate Darius. He dropped his notes. He sweated profusely. The jury watched with a mixture of pity and contempt. The narrative was cemented. Darius Cole was a ruthless mastermind, and the evidence was irrefutable. On the morning of the fourth day, the prosecution rested its case. Evelyn leaned forward, a triumphant, almost imperceptible smirk playing on her lips. She looked down at Arthur. "Mr. Penhaligon," Evelyn said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Does the defense have any witnesses to call, or are we ready for closing arguments?" Arthur stood up slowly, looking terrified. He glanced at Darius, then back to the judge. "Your Honor, against my strongest advice, the defense calls its final witness. We call the defendant, Darius Cole, to the stand." A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Calling a defendant to the stand in a murder trial, especially one facing such overwhelming evidence, was legal suicide. It opened him up to blistering cross-examination. Evelyn's eyes widened slightly in surprise, but the surprise quickly melted into predatory glee. This was better than she could have hoped for. She would get to watch the prosecution eviscerate him live, on the record. "Very well," Evelyn said, gesturing grandly. "The defendant will take the stand." Darius stood up. The heavy chains around his ankles clinked loudly in the sudden, dead silence of the courtroom. He walked slowly toward the witness box, his head bowed, playing the role until the very last second. He raised his right hand, swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and sat down. Arthur approached the podium. "Mr. Cole," he began, his voice shaking. "Did you embezzle $40 million from the City Infrastructure Fund?" "No, sir." "I did not," Darius replied, his voice soft, almost a whisper. "Did you order the murder of investigative journalist Thomas Steele?" "No, sir." "Then, how do you explain the financial records, Mr. Cole? The offshore accounts? The Pegasus spyware infection on your phone?" Arthur asked, practically serving him up on a silver platter. Evelyn leaned forward, resting her chin on her hands, waiting for Darius to stutter, to cry, to break down and beg for mercy. She waited for the pathetic excuses that she would swiftly strike from the record. Instead, Darius Cole stopped looking at Arthur. He slowly turned his head and locked eyes directly with Judge Evelyn Carter. The change in his demeanor was instantaneous, violent, and terrifying. The slump vanished from his shoulders. The fear evaporated from his face, replaced by an expression of cold, calcified steel. His eyes, previously wide and nervous, narrowed into twin lasers of absolute, unwavering authority. The broken mechanic ceased to exist. The apex predator of the FBI's National Security Branch had just taken the room. When Darius spoke, his voice was no longer a terrified whisper. It was a deep, resonant baritone that commanded the air in the courtroom, vibrating with chilling precision. "I can explain it very simply, Your Honor," Darius said, his gaze drilling into Evelyn's soul. "Those accounts were fabricated to mask the real destination of the embezzled funds. Funds that were routed through Tornado Cash on the night of November 14th, directly into a holding shell company named Aegis Holdings in the Cayman Islands. A shell company, Your Honor, whose primary beneficiary is listed under your maiden name." The courtroom froze. The silence was so profound it felt like a vacuum had sucked the oxygen from the room. Evelyn's smirk vanished, instantly replaced by a mask of pale, breathless shock. "Excuse me?" Evelyn gasped, her voice cracking, her judicial composure shattering like cheap glass. "What did you just say?" Darius leaned forward into the microphone. "I said, Evelyn, the 40 million didn't go to me. It went to your offshore account. Account number 88499201A at the Bank of N.T. Butterfield and Son in the Caymans. You used Silas Vance, your personal fixer, to orchestrate the murder of Thomas Steele because he found the routing numbers." Chaos erupted in the gallery. Reporters frantically began typing on their phones, people gasped and murmured. The lead prosecutor shot out of his chair, his face red. "Objection. Your Honor, what is this? The witness is spewing baseless slander. Move to strike." Sustained. Evelyn screamed, slamming her gavel down with frantic, erratic force. Her hands were shaking violently. Sustained. Strike that from the record. Bailiff, remove the defendant from the stand immediately. I am holding you in criminal contempt of court. You can't hold me in contempt for answering the question, Evelyn, Darius replied, his voice slicing cleanly through her panic. He didn't move an inch. He ignored the bailiff stepping toward him. "And you can't strike the truth when the FBI has been listening to every word you've said in your chambers for the last 3 weeks." Arthur Penhaligon, no longer sweating, stood tall at the podium. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a gold FBI badge, clipping it to his lapel. "Special Agent Penhaligon, FBI Anti-Corruption Task Force," he announced clearly to the stunned room. "The defense submits into evidence Federal Warrant Alpha Tango 7, authorizing the deep cover infiltration of this syndicate." Evelyn's face drained of all color, turning a sickly, ashen gray. Her breathing became shallow and rapid. The walls of her meticulously constructed empire were collapsing around her in real time. She looked at Darius, the greasy mechanic, the nobody, and finally saw the lethal intelligence radiating from him. He hadn't been trapped in her web, she had been lured into his. "You." Evelyn choked out, pointing a trembling finger at Darius. "You're Special Agent Darius Cole, National Security Branch," Darius said, his voice ringing with absolute finality, "and you, Judge Carter, are finished. Arrest him." Evelyn shrieked, her voice reaching a hysterical pitch, looking wildly at the court bailiffs. "He is a murderer. He is a liar. Arrest him." The bailiffs froze, confused by the flashing FBI badge and the surreal turn of events. Darius calmly reached into the pocket of his county-issued suit. He pulled out his own FBI credentials, slapping them onto the wooden ledge of the witness box. Then, he looked directly at the security camera mounted at the back of the courtroom, the camera that fed directly to the judge's private servers. "Director Vance," Darius said clearly into the microphone. "Execute." For 3 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Evelyn stood up, her chest heaving, desperately looking for an exit, her mind frantically calculating how to spin this, who to call, how to escape. Then, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom exploded open. A flood of heavily armed federal agents wearing tactical vests emblazoned with FBI swarmed into the room. They bypassed the gallery, bypassed the defense table, and moved with terrifying precision straight toward the bench. "Judge Evelyn Carter," shouted the lead agent, his voice echoing like a thunderclap, "step away from the bench." Keep your hands where we can see them." The gallery erupted into absolute pandemonium. Reporters were shouting, cameras were flashing, people were standing on the wooden benches to get a view of the unprecedented spectacle. The untouchable judge, the apex predator of Chicago, was suddenly the prey, caught in the blinding spotlight of her own courtroom. Evelyn backed away, hitting the wall behind her chair. Her legs gave out, and she slumped against the dark wood paneling, the gavel slipping from her trembling hand and clattering pointlessly onto the floor. The illusion of her power was gone, stripped away to reveal the terrified, corrupt shell beneath. She looked at Darius, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and pure, unadulterated hatred. Darius simply stood in the witness box, completely motionless, his expression blank. He watched the hard, brutal reality of karma finally arrive to collect its debts. The takedown was swift, clinical, and utterly humiliating. Federal agents vaulted over the wooden partition of the bench. They didn't treat Evelyn with the deference usually afforded to a judge, they treated her like the high-level cartel operative she truly was. They grabbed her arms, spinning her roughly against the oak paneling. "Evelyn Carter, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, money laundering, and treason against the judicial oath of the United States," the lead agent recited, the Miranda rights sounding like a death knell. Click. Click. The cold, heavy steel of handcuffs ratcheted tightly around her wrists, biting into her skin. It was the exact same sensation she had callously ordered her police goons to inflict upon Darius weeks ago. The irony was a bitter, metallic taste in her mouth. "You can't do this to me," Evelyn whispered, her voice a broken rasp, tears of pure panic streaking her flawless makeup. "I am a sitting judge. I have friends in Washington. I know the mayor. You have no idea who you are dealing with." "We know exactly who we're dealing with, Evelyn," Darius said, stepping down from the witness box. The county bailiffs rushed forward, quickly unlocking the heavy iron chains from his ankles and wrists. Darius rolled his shoulders, the physical constraints gone, his true authority fully restored. He walked up to the bench, stopping inches from where Evelyn was being held by the agents. He looked down at her, his eyes devoid of any pity. "We have Silas in custody," Darius told her quietly, so only she could hear over the screaming chaos of the press. "We raided your offices an hour ago. We have the Pegasus digital footprint you used to frame me, traced directly to your secure terminal. We have the Tornado Cash blockchain logs cross-referenced with your Cayman accounts. Your friends in Washington are already burning your files and denying they ever knew you. You don't have an empire anymore, Evelyn. You have a concrete cell." Evelyn stared at him, the horrifying reality finally crushing the last of her delusions. She wasn't going to scheme her way out of this. There were no bribes left to pay, no favors left to call in. She was going to spend the rest of her natural life in a maximum security federal penitentiary, surrounded by the very people she had corruptly sentenced to further her own greed. The psychological weight of that truth hit her with physical force, making her knees buckle. "Get her out of here," Darius commanded, turning his back on her. Two FBI agents hauled Evelyn to her feet. They didn't let her gather her things. They didn't let her maintain her dignity. They perp-walked the Honorable Judge Evelyn Carter straight down the center aisle of her own courtroom. The media frenzy was blinding. Cameras shoved into her face, reporters screaming questions, capturing the epic, humiliating downfall of Chicago's most corrupt official. She was dragged out the heavy double doors, marched through the fluorescent-lit hallways, and shoved aggressively into the back of a waiting armored FBI transport van. The heavy metal doors slammed shut, plunging her into the exact same suffocating darkness she had condemned Darius to. Back in the courtroom, the chaos slowly began to subside as agents secured the area. Special Agent Penhaligon walked up to Darius, handing him his holstered weapon and his tailored suit jacket. "Clean sweep, Cole," Penhaligon smiled. "Director Vance is thrilled. The whole syndicate structure is collapsing as we speak. Silas is already talking to get a plea deal." Darius slipped his arms into the tailored jacket, adjusting the lapels, feeling the familiar, reassuring weight of his firearm against his ribs. He looked around the empty courtroom, the scattered papers, the abandoned gavel lying on the floor. It was a desecrated temple, finally cleansed. She thought she was untouchable because she wrote the rules, Darius said softly, his voice echoing slightly in the vast room. She forgot that we are the ones who enforce them. He turned and walked down the aisle, his footsteps echoing with steady, rhythmic purpose. The mechanic was gone. The victim was an illusion. The ghost had materialized, brought down the wrath of the federal government, and vanished back into the shadows, leaving behind nothing but the shattered ruins of a corrupt empire and the cold, unyielding reality of absolute justice. The scales of justice always balance out in the end, especially when you try to frame the wrong man. Judge Evelyn Carter thought her gavel made her a god, but she never saw the FBI's ultimate weapon hiding right in plain sight. Her arrogance built her empire, but hard karma tore it down in the most satisfying way possible. Did you love watching this corrupt judge get exactly what she deserved? If this intense story of psychological warfare, deep cover operations, and brutal justice kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button. It helps the channel bring you more epic thrillers. Don't forget to share this video with your friends who love a massive plot twist.